Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would take a look at another AKHi TV video, and we're going to review what he has to say about Canelo Alvarez. Basically, they're going to co-sign what Demetrius Andrade has said, or they're going to agree with what he said, which is basically a lot of the shit that we've been hearing new media and the LDBC saying about Canelo Alvarez's career for quite some time now. Now, let's talk about this. Why did they necessarily say this about Canelo Alvarez's career? Why did they put these narratives out? Why did they put these narratives out about Canelo Alvarez, but at the same time they try to argue Terrence Crawford as the number one pound for pound fighter, even though he clearly does not have any A class names on his resume? The answer is very obvious, and if you've seen a certain amount of their videos, if you've seen a certain amount of the narratives that they try to push out of there or that they try to put out there, you know that these channels are pro-racial. And to put it very simply, they're pro-black. A certain amount of people are not going to like that, but it is what it is. Once again, I have no problem with certain people standing by their demographic. The problem comes in when you spread a bunch of your own bullshit propaganda and try to put it out there. And that's what these guys have been doing about Canelo Alvarez. And if you take a look at this demographic, that is to show you that these channels, they are pro-black, and overall, they are racist. It is what it is, because their narrative has basically been that Canelo Alvarez, oh, he's only unifying the 168-pound division because the weak European fighters, they're in the division now. They dominate that division now, or they're the ones that are champions. Why can't he go to 160? Once again, when we really take a look at the credentials at the next two fighters that he's going to be fighting next, when you take a look at the next two fighters in a Billy Joe Saunders and a Caleb Plant, not only are they otherworldly talented, but they pretty much have the same credentials as a David Benavidez, as a Jermall Charlo, as a Demetrius Andrade. Now you can really argue who's the most talented out of all of them if you wanted to, but they're not worlds apart. These guys have been trying to act like they're other worlds apart when it comes down to it, and that Canelo Alvarez only picks out the weakest link. But they have to portray that narrative. And the reason why they do this is because they want a black fighter to be the number one pound for pound fighter. They cannot have Canelo Alvarez as the number one pound for pound fighter, and that's a big part of the reason why they also tried to tear down Lomachenko when he was ranked on the number one pound for pound. I assure you that if Canelo Alvarez or Vasily Lomachenko, if they were black men, the LDBC and new media would have no problem whatsoever ranking Saul Canelo Alvarez as the number one pound for pound. I assure you that 100%. But I just wanted to mention something here, because the LDBC and new media especially, what they've been alleging is that Canelo Alvarez, he's only fighting these guys because they're European, and European fighters clearly aren't as good as the American fighters. Dante's Boxing Nation and AKHi TV and Boxing Eagle, they try to spill you this bullshit all the time. Well, you should cheer for your country, and overall, the European fighters, they just aren't as dominant. They're not saying that the European fighters aren't as dominant. They're saying that the Caucasian fighters basically can't fight to a Demetrius Andrade or a Jermall Charlo or a David Benavidez. Now, is it true that the Caucasian fighters usually are not as dominant as the Latino fighters or the American black fighters usually in boxing? Yes, that is true, usually. But when you take a look at the world in boxing right now, it is a very diverse sport. When you take a look at the top 10 pound for pound list, you're probably going to have about 3 Caucasian fighters there. You're probably going to have about 3 black fighters there. You're probably going to have at least 2 Asian fighters there. You're probably going to have at least 2 Hispanic fighters there. And that depends on whether you count Canelo Alvarez as a Caucasian Hispanic or you count him as, more Latino heritage. He can really identify with both, it seems like. But when it comes down to it, bottom line is this. There's a reason why they do not want Canelo Alvarez as the number one pound for pound fighter. And it is completely racially motivated. But anyways, let's see what they have to say.
And went to 12 rounds, and he looked like shit. I mean, listen, man, the proof is in the pudding.
The fact that Canelo Alvarez is refusing to fight him, he refused to fight him at 154, 160, and 168. And he pointed out everything that new media have been preaching, that the moment Canelo peeped that David Benavidez lost the title on the scale, he picked on the weakest links. Canelo always fight the weakest link, the same way he did.
And let me tell you this, Once upon a time, they were using Billy Joe Saunders as a pawn, just like they're using David Benavidez and his team as a pawn right now to try and tear down Canelo Alvarez's career. But now that Canelo Alvarez has decided to fight these fighters, they're basically saying that, oh, well, the Caucasians, they're not as elite as these guys. Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, when you take a look at them, they're pretty much just as good as a Demetrius Andrade or a Jermall Charlo, if not possibly better. Caleb Plant, to be honest with you, when we talk about that pack of a Callum Smith, Danny Jacobs, Demetrius Andrade, Jermall Charlo, Billy Joe Saunders, and David Benavidez, Caleb Plant, to be honest with you, he actually might be the most elite out of all that pack. And a certain amount of people may disagree. Now, I'm just talking about in terms of a skill set. When you talk about in terms of a resume and accomplishments, could be Billy Joe Saunders, possibly could be Jermall Charlo, maybe someone else that I'm not mentioning. Demetrius Andrade, in terms of accomplishments and resume, especially resume, he would have to be at the bottom of that pack, whether they like that or not.
With his WBO title at 154, Canelo didn't want no part of Andrade. When Andrade was the champion challenging Canelo as a non-champion, Canelo never was interested in fighting Andrade for the WBO belt. The moment Andrade vacated the belt, obviously Canelo fought Smith. This is the same thing Canelo did with David Benavidez at 168. When David Benavidez had the WBC title, they reached out to Canelo team on more than one occasion.
And listen, when I say this, do I believe that Canelo Alvarez sometimes does maneuvering? Do I agree with every move that he does? No. Do I believe that maybe he did a bit of maneuvering when he fought Liam Smith? Sure. But some of these fighters that he's facing, they're not Liam Smiths. They're better, they're higher caliber than Liam Smith. Liam Smith is a C-class fighter. That's what he is. He has a C-class skill set, in my opinion. When you take a look at Billy Joe Saunders, that is an A-grade fighter with an A-grade skill set. When you take a look at Callum Smith, that is an A-grade fighter. I'm not going to necessarily 100% say A-grade skill set, but that is an A-grade fighter. When you take a look at Sergey Kovalev, even at that point in time in his career, that was an A-grade fighter. He was one of the top light heavyweights in the world, still had a belt, was coming off of 2 very decent wins. All right? So that's the bottom line.
Canelo team turned it down. The moment...
And I say that because what their narrative is that, well, who is Canelo fighting? He's fighting all these bums. He's handpicking his opponents. All of his opponents, pretty much as of recent, besides the last fight that he had against Ildrim, they're pretty much on the same level, if not above a Charlo or an Andrade, all right, or a Benavidez. But once again, they make no mistake about it, they don't really support Benavidez. They're just trying to pretend like they do because, once again, they're using him as a pawn. They did this with Billy Joe Saunders at one point in time as well because Canelo Alvarez one time said that he didn't want to face Billy Joe Saunders, so they use whoever they have to. So for a certain amount of the Latino fan base that might be falling for this shit, they don't like David Benavidez that much either. And trust me, when the time comes, they're going to support Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez they're going to support Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade over David Benavidez. But anyway,
David Benavidez.
That's why you've not seen any videos from Dante's Box Nation or AKHi TV saying that Jermall Charlo ducked these guys. You've never heard them say that they're ducking those guys. All right? Anyway.
Lost the belt. The second day, Canelo requests the WBC to fight for David Benavidez's title against Avni Yildirim. This is what Andrade is pointing out, is that Canelo always picking on the weakest link.
If you're talking about an Avni Yildirim, that's understandable. If you're talking about a Liam Smith, that's understandable. Even if you wanted to talk about a Sergey Kovalev, we're sure he would have been the weaker link at the light heavyweight division, but he still was a great threat. And when we really take a look at that logically and objectively, Sergey Kovalev might have been a bigger threat for Canelo Alvarez in that fight, even at that point in time in his career, than a Demetrius Andrade and a Jermall Charlo. Can someone please tell me what performances Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo have really had in their career that makes them so scary for Canelo Alvarez? Once again, that's not me saying that I don't want the fights to happen. But I'm not seeing this fantastic threat to Canelo Alvarez's throne the way that these guys try to make it out to be. When I say that, I believe Callum Smith and Sergey Kovalev were at least on a very similar level at that point in their career to a Demetrius Andrade or a Jermall Charlo in terms of threatening a Canelo Alvarez. Of course, people sometimes laugh at that statement, but let's just be real. What credentials do Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade really have over those fighters, even at that point in time in their career? Callum Smith was the Ring Magazine champion of the super middleweight division. Has Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade ever been the Ring Magazine champion of any division? Now, who knows? Maybe Jermall Charlo at one point in time was the Ring Magazine champion when he defeated J-Rock, so maybe he would have been the Ring Magazine champion then, but I'm not sure if he even was the Ring Magazine champion then. So it is what it is.
Your take on what Andrade had to say when it came to Canelo Alvarez picking on the weakest link?
I say he's right on the money, but like you said last time, Andrade and Charlo need to be super loud on the subject to publicly embarrass Canelo, to make him look like a fraud with his antics of him ducking the both of them. And I think if anything, like Andrade, he's doing everything he can, but I don't see why he cannot try to create some.
Well, you know what? That's an interesting point that you brought that up. That he's doing everything he can. Because is he really doing everything that he can? Because there are certain fights out there that Demetrius Andrade could possibly get that I've not heard him call out. I mean, you're telling me that you could possibly not get a Sergey Derevyanchenko next? You can't possibly get a Chris Eubank Jr. next? These are certain fighters to where they don't have a lot to lose in their career. They're already B-class fighters. But none of these guys will face a Demetrius Andrade? Is that what you're telling me? I'm sorry, I'm just not believing it. Nobody will face a Demetrius Andrade, and from what I hear, he hasn't been too serious about possibly facing a David Benavidez or Danny Jacobs. Apparently, he won't fight Danny Jacobs because they're friends, which is the most bullshit excuse that I've ever heard. That's the same excuse that Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter tried to use for a while. Alright, ain't no such thing as friends in professional boxing.
Publicity over that. Imagine if Floyd,
at least enough to not fight each other,
were to do the same thing, if he were to avoid anyone. Everybody would just get on his case, and they would publicly shame him to say, oh, Floyd's like avoiding this guy, blah, 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 this guy. So I don't see how those tables could be turned against Canelo, because this guy has no manhood to talk about all the things that he's been slandered by from Andrade and Charlo alone, and he doesn't even mention them. He has nothing to say to them because he knows that they're both dangerous.
Well, just because a fighter mentions another fighter, does that mean that they're always serious about facing these guys? Let's take a look at Jermall Charlo, for example. He recently has mentioned David Benavidez, and what did the LDBC new media try to push? Oh, Jermall Charlo, man, he's calling out all these names, so we got to give him a lot of credit. And then what did we hear? That he wasn't serious about fighting them. But you're not going to see any videos on that on AKHi TV's channel. You know, it is what it is. Once again, if you're going to say the same thing about Canelo Alvarez, that he's avoiding certain fighters and overall that he's not fighting anybody, then you have the same energy when one of your boys, Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade, also doesn't seem serious about taking a big fight. But you're not going to hear them say that. Once again, they're very pro-racially biased, okay? That's what their objective is. I had a certain amount of people tell me, oh, no, they're not. Yet, yes, they are. If you really know what you're watching, yes, they are. Okay? It is very clear what their objective is.
I think, like, if anything, if Canelo were to fight them or were to have fought them in the past, he would have been 10 times more embarrassed compared to Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah. Canelo is the Walmart version of Floyd Mayweather. He's the poor version, and that's a compliment to say the least, because he's nowhere near Floyd's.
Well, he's not Floyd Mayweather, in my opinion. But they're not as extremely far apart as many people like to say. I mean, well, what I'll say is this. I think Floyd is obviously, you know, a couple levels above Canelo Alvarez when we talk about prime. But people that are trying to act like Canelo Alvarez is just fighting nobodies. He's fighting Danny Jacobs at his peak. He's fighting Callum Smith at his peak. He's fighting Billy Joe Saunders at his peak. He fought Sergey Kovalev not at his peak, but at a very decent point in his career. He fought Gennady Golovkin at his peak. He fought Lara at his peak. He fought Austin Trout at his peak. He fought Miguel Cotto at a very good point in his career. Alright? Canelo Alvarez is just not out here fighting no names like your boy Terrence Crawford. He's out here actually fighting good names. And a certain amount of people, they can try to degrade them because they're Caucasian fighters all they want to. Listen, if you know what you're watching, Callum Smith, even though I don't think he's as talented as a Caleb Plant or maybe even a David Benavidez, a Ring Magazine champion, that's something special. And when it comes down to it, Callum Smith is a decently talented fighter. So is Gennady Golovkin. So is a certain amount of these other fighters. All right? But they have to allege that those fighters were all hype jobs because, once again, they don't want Canelo Alvarez because they need a black fighter to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. All right? It is what it is.
Canelo, how can you claim you the best in the world and you say NBF? You the pioneer of the NBF belt, the witness protection belt.
You know, here's the problem. Not only has Canelo Alvarez fought a multitude of black fighters, and great black fighters, but when it comes down to it, if you're going to say that about Canelo Alvarez, you have to say that about Terence Crawford. Because Terence Crawford has not done his due diligence in trying to go and fight those elite black fighters. Really, Crawford hasn't done his due diligence to fight any elite fighters. But you notice overall that they're not going to degrade Terence Crawford overall. They say that Canelo Alvarez doesn't like to fight American black fighters. Let me ask you guys something. How many American black fighters has Terence Crawford fought in his career? Because really, to be honest with you, I can't remember one. I can't remember one good American black fighter that Terence Crawford has ever fought in his career. And every single one that apparently he was going to fight, either he's not interested in, or they're over on the other side of the street with PBC, which was a company he decided not to sign with. So how serious is Terence Crawford in fighting these elite American black fighters? And also, you notice when it comes to Caucasian fighters that Canelo Alvarez fights, they love to discredit them. But then when it comes overall to the Caucasian fighters that Terence Crawford might fight, or Demetrius Andrade, or one of these guys, all of a sudden they're elite fighters. Interesting.
How can you claim you the best when you avoid the most dominant race in boxing? Not just one, two.
The black American fighters usually are the most dominant race or the most dominant demographic in boxing, but as of right now, you can't 100% say that that's the case. Once again, when you talk about the demographics in boxing right now, it is very diverse. This is probably one of the first times right now to where it's kind of up for grabs. There's a certain amount of dominant Caucasians. There's a certain amount of dominant Caucasians that you can argue rule certain divisions. There's some dominant Hispanics that rule certain divisions. And there's some dominant black fighters that rule certain divisions. You know, also some certain Asian fighters that are very dominant as well, like Naoya Inoue. But I can't say that, maybe some of the lighter weight classes. But the upper weight classes, probably not. Maybe Bivol, if you were able to beat Beater Beef, because I believe he's got Korean ethnicity. But,
Black American fighters and the Mexican American fighters. He avoided the undefeated Black American fighters, Andrade and Charlo. He also avoiding undefeated Mexican.
I believe that Canelo Alvarez sent Jermall Charlo an offer, and I 100% believe that he turned that down. And AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation even at one point in time admitted that Jermall Charlo turned it down because apparently he got lowballed. That's what they were trying to say, which is bullshit. Charlo just isn't serious about taking any of these big fights. But anyway.
Mexican fighters, David Benavidez. How can you claim you the best in the world when you avoiding the most two dominant race? And don't bring up Daniel Jacobs. That's a good win on Canelo resume. Possibly the best win. But Daniel Jacobs...
No, the best win on Canelo Alvarez's resume, in my opinion, is Gennady Golovkin. That is the highest ranked opponent that he's ever fought. In my opinion, that is the best opponent that he has ever beaten. At least once. Because the first time, I thought was kind of a robbery. I thought Golovkin should have won. But it is what it is. Anyways, I thought he beat Golovkin the second time around. At least when I was watching the rematch, it looked like Canelo Alvarez was winning the majority of the rounds. So, it is what it is. That is the best win in his career. Danny Jacobs, I believe, is a great win in his career. But there are even greater wins in his career than Danny Jacobs. I believe Sergey Kovalev is a greater win than Danny Jacobs.
Already lost before, on more than one occasion. He lost to Gennady Golovkin, and he got stopped in the past in a way more brutal fashion than Canelo did. Canelo didn't even stop Daniel Jacobs. The point here is...
That's great. Neither did Gennady Golovkin. I can assure you Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo would not stop Danny Jacobs either. So, what's your point? It is what it is.
Andrade and Charlo...
But of course, one of the points that they've been trying to say is that, Canelo only fights these guys off of bad performances. once again, can someone please tell me how dominant Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo really are? Maybe Demetrius Andrade, because I've seen him dominant in certain performances. I mean, you would have to be dominant against the C-class fighters that he faces on a daily basis, or on a yearly basis, excuse me. But Jermall Charlo, can we just be real? How dominant has Jermall Charlo really looked? I mean, seriously. Did he have like a 7 rounds to 5 fight against Matt Korobov a couple years ago? Like, come on, man.
Their talent is on a whole nother.
Like, these guys try to act like... I have so many people trying to tell me, like, well, of course Canelo's ducking these black fighters because Floyd Mayweather Jr. gave him a certain amount of trouble and all that shit, and Lara gave him a certain amount of trouble. And listen, man, Lara and Floyd Mayweather are 2 once-in-a-lifetime type of talents. Lara came from the Cuban boxing school. He is a once-in-a-lifetime boxing IQ type of talent. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is a once-in-a-lifetime boxing talent with amazing boxing IQ, amazing reflexes, amazing skills. Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo, I think, are very great talents, but are they on the same level as a Mayweather and a Lara, even in my opinion? No.
Level. So, like you said, I completely agree with the point you brought up. Andrade, he has to do more than just sit back and watch. He has to talk about it.
I agree. What Andrade and Charlo should do, they should go after David Benavidez next. That's what they should go after. Because if they were to win over David Benavidez, then basically Canelo Alvarez would have no more excuse to not fight them anymore. We already know Jermall Charlo is not serious about facing a David Benavidez. The question I have is, Demetrius Andrade serious about facing a David Benavidez? Because apparently he said that he didn't want to fight David Benavidez because he didn't have a belt. Which to a degree would be certainly understandable, but if you want to get that Canelo Alvarez fight, it doesn't matter. You have to get names on your resume. I'm not really sure how serious Demetrius Andrade really is about getting these big names. And people can tell me all they want to, oh, it's because, you know, he's this slick black fighter and all this other stuff. Canelo's fought a multitude of black fighters. People can bitch and moan and complain all they want to. And am I saying that Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo would not be somewhat deserving of Canelo Alvarez fight? That's not what I'm saying at all. But if you want that fight, you're probably going to have to face the bigger names. It is what it is. Because as of right now, Canelo is fighting fighters with around the same level of talent. He's fighting fighters overall with the same amount of accomplishments, you know, as credentials. So it is what it is.
He has to
besides Ildrim, of course.
Expose Canelo for the duckish moves he continues to make. What Andre should do is take a page out of Devin Haney's book. You see Teofimo avoiding Devin Haney. Devin Haney does everything to let the public know he did everything to fight Teo, and Teo turned the fight down. He did the same thing with Gary Russell. If you really want the fans to be on your side, you have to let the fans know and continue to press. I
hope you didn't just say that Teofimo Lopez ducked Gary Russell Jr., because I'll tell you this right now. Teofimo Lopez would whoop Gary Russell's ass. Gary Russell is an A-class fighter, but he's way too small for that division. Teofimo would whoop that dude's ass. Now, is he possibly ducking a Devin Haney? From what I heard, it's very possible, but I have to do more research on that because I've basically been hearing it from these channels, and you can't trust anything these channels say because I already have a pro-racial agenda.
These fighters, they continue to avoid you. Andrade has to take a page out of what Devin Haney did and what he continues to do. Also, take a page out of what Muhammad Ali did. Muhammad Ali didn't just get the Sonny Liston fight. Muhammad Ali drove with a bus to Sonny Liston home. And Sonny Liston, he came out with a gun, shooting at Ali. And Ali ran back to the bus and left. This is what Ali had to do to get the Sonny Liston fight. So I'm not saying Andre need to drive a bus to Mexico City and go to Canelo home. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is he needs to at least, when he goes to the press conference, man, sneak your way into the ring. Disrespect Canelo. If you can smack Canelo. You might get the fight that way.
I promise you, if he smacks Canelo, Demetrius Andrade is going to get a punch in the face that he'll never forget. Canelo's a big boy, so it is what it is. Anyway, but when it comes down to what Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo need to do is start taking these big names. I mean, really, their runs at middleweight, really Demetrius Andrade's run for his whole entire career has been quite pathetic. Jermall Charlo, he had a decent run at 154, fought some decent fighters, but at 160, it has been absolutely abysmal, the level of competition that he has fought. And his next opponent isn't any better. I mean, who is he fighting? Juan Montiel? Some fighter who recently just defeated a washed-up version of James Kirkland? I mean, am I supposed to be impressed by that? But once again, you're not going to see an AKHi TV video on that. Interesting.
This is what you have to do to get the fight? Yeah, I mean, do what you have to do to get the fight. Because apparently insults ain't going to do it.
Canelo, you a bitch. I'm putting it out there. No, I don't like to disrespect men that step into the ring, but then you fighting Kirtland.
Let me also say this again, because I had one person in my comment section when I did that Demetrius Andrade video saying like, oh, you're wrong about the Lara Demetrius Andrade situation. No, Demetrius Andrade avoided an Araceli Lara fight. Facts. A certain amount of people cannot like that. I don't really give a shit. He avoided an Araceli Lara fight. When Lara finally called him out on his bluff for a certain amount of years, people were saying that Lara was avoiding Andrade. Then when Lara finally called him out on his bluff, Andrade said the same thing that Canelo Alvarez said about Demetrius Andrade and Billy Joe Saunders once upon a time. I don't want to fight you because you're boring and my fan base wouldn't be entertained by that. That's exactly what he said. Those are his words. So a certain amount of people are going to deny that all they want to. He avoided that fight. Okay? Anyway.
This has been in the ring since Glenn Tapia. When you have an opportunity to fight Demetrius Andrade for the WBO, damn, I thought in the sport of boxing, people want to be a champion, to have that title. I understand you got De La Hoya, you got the promotion team, you got the money, you got the contract. I mean, you got the country. I mean, you got the country behind you, the fan base. But damn, you scared of getting into a fight. I thought you was the man. If I knew some Espanol, I'd hit you up with that too. But damn, come on, man, stop playing. Like, shit, man. All I want to do is fight, show people I'm the best in the world. I thank God for everything that comes my way, and every obstacle that comes my way, man. I know how to slip and slide in between, man.
Andre already told Canelo, you don't got no cojones. You the B word. I mean, I didn't know what cojones meant. I Googled it. I was like, oh, man, he told him you don't got no balls? Come on, man. Are you saying you the best in the world? You know what Canelo said when Andre told him you don't got no cojones?
What?
Canelo responded by saying, I don't like his style. In other words, Canelo pretty much just said that he want to change the difficulty mode when it comes to fighting Andrade. It's on too difficult. He want easy mode. Andrade is not there to...
And once again, that's possible. Canelo Alvarez said that once upon a time about Billy Joe Saunders as well. And that's when the LDBC and new media started using Billy Joe Saunders a little bit as a pawn to try and basically allege that he was avoiding a Billy Joe Saunders. You know, but it is what it is. Anyway, when it comes down to it, Canelo Alvarez, is it possible that he, thinks that Demetrius Andrade has a wrong type of style for him? It's very possible. But if Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo, but especially Demetrius Andrade, since he seems to have more of that slick style, when it comes down to it, if he really wants that Canelo Alvarez fight, he's going to have to go after some of the big names. From what I hear, David Benavidez is willing to fight any name. All right, whether they be from 160 or 168. So we'll see what happens.
Be hit. He want to fight someone that's there to be hit. How you the best in the world and you can't beat every single style? You got to pick and choose. And then when Canelo fought Gennady Golovkin, remember what he did. He claims Andre's style is too boring because he moves around. And then when he fought Gennady Golovkin, that's all he did was move around in the first fight.
That's great if you want to claim overall that Canelo Alvarez said that, but here's my problem. Billy Joe Saunders is an excellent mover, and Caleb Plant might be the best mover in that whole entire division of 168 pounds. He might be the most talented fighter besides Canelo Alvarez in that whole entire division. So it is what it is. Anyway, that's at least if you're objectively looking at things.
He moved more than Andrade moves. But he got the audacity to tell Andrade how to fight. Andrade, do not move. Stay still. When I throw the right hand, don't move your head. Stay in the center line so I can catch you and knock you out. This is what Canelo is saying. He said, how the hell are you the best in the world when you telling fighters what style you prefer and what style you can't beat? At the end of the day, or at least the night, Canelo been avoiding Andrade and Charlo for the past 7 years to this day. He avoided Andre and Charlo at 154 and at 160. And soon, when Andre moves up to 168, Andrade and Charlo for the past 7 years to this day. He avoided Andrade and Charlo at 154 and at 160. And soon, when Andrade...
Well, Jermall Charlo, from what I heard, avoided that Canelo fight. And you can try to deny that all you want to. All the pro-racial, people can try to argue that all they want to. I 100% believe that Jermall Charlo turned down that contract. Because from what I've seen, and you always have to trust people's actions over their words. I don't care how many times these fighters call fighters out. You have to take a look at their actions. And if they're not showing you with their actions that they're serious about taking any of these big fights, they're not serious about taking any of these big fights. What Jermall Charlo has showed us with his actions is that he called out a David Benavidez. Then when David Benavidez and his trainer called him out on his bluff, all of a sudden he grew silent. When he called out Demetrius Andrade called him out on his bluff. All of a sudden he grew silent. All right, Canelo Alvarez apparently sent him a contract, and Jermall Charlo said that it was a low budge offer. All right? So come on. Jermall Charlo very clearly is not serious about any of these fights.
He moves up to 168. What is Canelo going to do? He's going to avoid him at 168 too? The same way now he's avoiding David Benavidez. So what I'm saying, the criticism, the legendary fighters repeat to a T. Chavez Sr., Barrera Morales, Oscar De La Hoya, Hopkins. These fighters I just named, they fought the best. They have a reputation. They're going to fight the best, win or lose. Oscar De La Hoya, he fought the best, win or lose. Chavez.
And let me tell you this, a certain amount of people are not going to agree. None of those fighters, in my opinion, were on the level of Canelo Alvarez. Maybe Chavez, and a certain amount of people would disagree with the statement that I'm saying that neither Bernard Hopkins or Oscar De La Hoya were on the level of Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. And when you take a look at his resume, he has a fantastic resume. In my opinion, Bernard Hopkins, in terms of talent, was not on the same level of Canelo Alvarez, and a certain amount of people are going to heavily disagree with that. In my opinion, Bernard Hopkins was one of the more overrated fighters in boxing history, and a certain amount of people are not going to agree. In my opinion, even though Oscar De La Hoya was otherworldly talented, there's a reason why he lost a good majority of big fights in his career. It is what it is, all right? Now, Chavez, he's a little bit different, but it is what it is. In my opinion, Chavez would be greater than the both of those fighters, but Canelo might even be above him.
Senior, he fought the best, win or lose. Barrera fought the best, win or lose. Morales fought the best, win or lose. They fought the best, win or lose. Canelo, if it's not a guaranteed win, he ain't fighting you. This is what he told his trainer. He said, I will never let you down. In other words, I will never fight a risky fight no more. And people want to say Canelo improved since he lost to Mayweather. How did you improve? I want to know when. When have Canelo improved? When was the time that people was like, oh man, Canelo, he a completely different fighter today than he was yesterday? I really want to know when was that, because...
Well, people say that Canelo Alvarez completely improved after the Mayweather fight. Really, it was actually a slow transition. It was really a slow transition from the Floyd Mayweather fight to the Lara fight. Really, the first time that I really started noticing Canelo Alvarez adjusting his style was in the Miguel Cotto fight. That's really when I started noticing, wow, he's really starting to improve. But the Gennady Golovkin rematch, that might be when I really started to notice, or at least, I noticed 100% for sure the major improvements. And I said, wow, Canelo really is growing into his own.
Canelo lost to Floyd 8 years ago. That's the day he stopped fighting American-style fighters. After that, he looked bad against Lara. Arguably lost the fight because I had him losing.
I had him losing too. But, Canelo Alvarez has won almost every other fight in his career. So it is what it is.
Lara went in 8 rounds to 4. It was a robbery completely. A lot of people agree, right? That was a close fight. Also, Gennady Golovkin, which was a couple years ago. He arguably lost both fights. So...
I thought he lost the first fight.
At the end of the day, when did Canelo make this improvement? Even against Kovalev, he looked bad. He was losing the fight till he got the knockout. So Canelo didn't improve. He just, like Andre pointed out, he always fights the weakest links. And that's the problem with Canelo Alvarez. He want to protect his record when it's not even perfect. See, what made Floyd Mayweather a superstar is that he fought the best while having a perfect record. He fought Sugar Shane Mosley, when people was accusing him of ducking Sugar Shane, even though Sugar Shane avoided Floyd Mayweather when Floyd was Pretty Boy. And Floyd still gave him the opportunity the moment Mosley knocked down Margarito. Floyd fought Pacquiao, Floyd fought Canelo, and beat them with ease. This is why Floyd Mayweather became TBE, because he fought the best and maintained his undefeated record. Canelo doesn't even have an undefeated record, and he still doesn't want to fight the best. You literally can't make this up. This man had a guarantee.
Well, Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade, they do have an undefeated record. And I'm not really sure they want to face the best either. But anyway.
Guarantee purse on DAZN and still doesn't want to fight the best. This man lost his DAZN contract, $365 million, for cherry-picking Avni Yildirim, a fighter coming off a loss and 2-year layoff, for David Benavidez belt, where DAZN rejected the fight and scratched the contract. This is the type of fighter we're talking about. How can you claim you're the best in the world when you're not even the best in your division?
Shout out to all the other channels that have been putting in all the work, including you, AKHi. I really appreciate everything that you do.
I appreciate you, my brother. Always calling in, spin the real. I'll talk to you next time.
That's the only situation is Canelo. And what I was trying to state was that.
Anyways, that's really about it for this video. Just thought that I would review it because once again, it's very obvious what their intentions are. But anyway, that's really about it for this. We'll see if Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo are serious about getting those bigger fights, because apparently they're going to move up to the 168-pound division. And there's a fighter there by the name of David Benavidez that apparently is willing to face on all comers. So we'll see what happens. It'll be very interesting. But that's pretty much the end of this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.